there's nothing interesting to play. If only there was a game that I could play for thousands of hours and still discover new content in. Oh wow, perfect. I mean, I have a couple thousand hours, sure, but I don't... Hello Roguetumblers, and welcome to the indie sweetheart genre, roguelikes. A genre which somehow consistently pumps out high quality games at an ever increasing rate. But how? Why are roguelikes so prevalent nowadays? What does roguelike even mean? If you had any or none of these questions, you are in luck. I just got my answering questions about roguelikes degree, and after spending 200 grand for it, I really want to use it. So let's start at the very first game. The game that named the genre and started it all. Rogue. Wow, the resemblance is simply uncanny. I mean, I'm not sure what I expected from a game from 1980. Honestly, it's impressive considering that humans had discovered fire only 2 years earlier. In Rogue, you play as an adventurer, exploring a randomly generated dungeon with the goal of reaching the bottom floor to obtain the Amulet of Yendor, and then leave by going back through all the floors, all the while fighting monsters and trying to survive because death means starting over. Wait a minute, go back to the Discovery of Fire image. Enhance? Enhance? Dear God. Randomly generated dungeon, permadeath, reaching the bottom floor. It's Rogue before Rogue. All we knew is a lie. The genre needs a name change. What is this called? Oh, I see why they went with Rogue instead. But just think of the world where they are Apple-likes. Thank God it was only for Macs so it didn't spread as far. Yes, the first roguelike isn't actually the first roguelike. Beneath Apple Manor was the real first game to have both of the features that make up a roguelike. Permadeath and randomly generated maps, which combine together to create, theoretically, infinite replayability. So, how was this received at the time? Well, by analyzing cave paintings, I found a couple reviews. For example, Ugg says, smelly loser game. And Grung says, I don't care, Jerry just figured out how to make this thing that shoots a pointy thing real good. It appears that the public wasn't really interested in Rogue or Beneath Apple Manor. However, Rogue was popular amongst the comically nerdy. It was actually named the #1 game to be wedged to in both 1980 and 1981. But since the people who liked it were also the people who knew how to make games, they made a whole host of games that used the template. So I'm just gonna skip to 2008. Why? Well, because there's no human alive today that played any of them. Hey, that's not true. I played Moria. Who said that? As I said, no human alive today cares. In 2008, two important things happened. And also this economic thing, which who cares about it? The first important thing is that a conference was held in Berlin to define what being a roguelike meant. They even gave it a really official name, the Berlin Interpretation. And it's completely useless because it defines anything that's not exactly rogue as not roguelike, which is simply not what being a roguelike means nowadays. Proven by the other important thing that happened in 2008, the first roguelike in the more modern sense, Spelunky. Pictured here as the 2012 remaster, is a 2D platformer roguelike about exploring caverns and ruins while collecting treasure. And compared to Rogue, it's extremely simple to understand. All you want to do is get from the start of each level at the top to the end at the bottom. All you have to help you is some rope to safely descend and ascend, a whip to fight off eldritch horrors, and bombs to destroy the environment and yourself. Spelunky may be a simple game to pick up and play, but it's definitely not an easy game. You start at 4 HP, meaning you can get hit 4 times before dying. Right? Yeah, no, Spelunky is full of insta-kills. Dying in stupid ways is common enough to have its own wiki article, which, let's see here, has a total of 407 entries, all written with the spite of someone who lost a run to that. Spelunky was extremely successful. It had transformed roguelikes into something that didn't require a bachelor's in nerdology to understand. 3 months after the release of the Berlin Interpretation, the most popular roguelike wasn't really what was outlined, so the term roguelite was created to define games like Spelunky, a subgenre which would soon become way bigger than the main one. But I will leave that discussion for later when the modern definition of roguelike is more clear. The next important release for the genre was The Binding of Isaac, which came out in 2011 and doesn't natively support 16:9. Unfortunately, the black bars covered all the other important roguelikes that released between the original Isaac and its remaster in 2014, so I'm just gonna skip to that. The Binding of Isaac is, in my always correct opinion, the most influential roguelike of them all. It popularized the item system that is in basically every roguelike nowadays, and the concept of unlocks for future runs as a method of progression. Both are now pillars of the roguelike genre. But let's start at the basics. The Binding of Isaac is a roguelike where you play as a child in the most functional family in New Jersey. Or maybe you play as his ghost. Or maybe it's all in the head? Or it's a story being told by a really irresponsible father? Story aside, you play as one of many unlockable characters, which are all slightly different, but all progress through randomly generated dungeons to get items and fight bosses. The thing that impacts your gameplay the most are items, and they are divided in 4 categories. Active items that have a cooldown based on room clears, trinkets, which usually have very specific benefits, but you can only have one at a time, consumables, which are one-time boosts ranging from deal 4 damage to breaking the entire game, and finally, the most important category, passive items, which themselves have a tier system to rank them on how powerful they are. There is no limit to how many passive items you can get, and a lot of them have game-changing effects, like changing your mobility or your attacks or giving you entirely new abilities, and they all stack one on top of the other. The passive items add an extra level of variation to each run, prompting you to change your playstyle and make decisions to build towards that new playstyle. And this combos really well with the way you unlock things in the game, because as you progress, you will have access to more and more of the item pool while completing a few fun challenges. This system allows the game to always have something new for you to find and locks some of the more powerful items behind a challenge. Let's see here, how long does it take to fully unlock everything? And to get a final secret reward, you have to do this 3 times? A lot of people had to choose between curing cancer and fully 100%ing the Binding of Isaac. And they made the right choice. The Binding of Isaac was a massive success. It attracted even more players and developers to the roguelike genre, but it hadn't quite reached the level of popularity and prevalence it's at today. Not to say that there were no good or important games that released in that period. Just look at Slay the Spire or Dead Cells. Slay the Spire popularized the roguelike deck builder genre, which is more focused on your strategic decision making and build crafting over your moment-to-moment gameplay. Each character always starts with the same deck, and to reach your goal of beating the final boss, you will need to make tons of strategic decisions and build the most powerful deck you can with the random cards you are presented. The way you obtain those cards is very similar to real life. You can either buy them for excessively high prices or beat up 6-year-olds and steal theirs. The deck building is the most common and important type of decision you will make. The other 3 in order of importance are random events where you can usually sacrifice something to gain something else, your decisions in battle on how to use your cards, and the path you take to reach the boss. All this strategy and decision-making stuff is for amateurs though. Real cardboard addicts never read. We simply spam every card until we can't and pick the cards with the funniest pictures, and 1% of the time, it works every time. In contrast, Dead Cells is a more typical action-oriented roguelike. Its biggest innovation was adding a Metroidvania element to the roguelike formula, which was initially named a name so potently confusing to casuals that it killed 15 playtesters. Fortunately, they renamed it to Roguevania, which only killed 1. Dead Cells, notably, doesn't use an isometric view, something that had become quite common in roguelikes. It's instead fully 2D, which means the game can't really have more than 2 to 3 enemies attack you at once, making the game more focused on smaller fights. You even have a... oh, it's a Souls-like too? Wait, no! Don't add that to the name! No, stop! Yes, technically it's also a Souls-like. Maybe, kinda. But putting the combat aside, the thing that impacted the whole genre the most are the permanent upgrades, which are split in 2 types, the progression upgrades and the regular improvement upgrades. The regular improvement upgrades are simple stuff, like more uses on your healing flask, starting with a random weapon, or the ability to restock the shop. Nothing that seriously locks you from progressing. The progression upgrades are what puts the Vania in Roguevania. These allow you to access new areas and entire new maps by giving you the tools to solve a problem you couldn't solve before. However, unlike the simple upgrades, which you can just buy at a shop, the progression upgrades need to be found in the various maps of the game, adding more incentive to explore. Both of these games were huge successes and definitely helped the growth of the genre, which was about to get a huge influx of developers, all because Steve decided to eat my yogurt. But I'm no fool. I poison all my food just in case someone tries to steal it. So Steve's gluttony caused a global pandemic, giving players and developers alike extra free time at home, which combined with development tools that were only getting more powerful, meant that indie projects started exploding from 2020 on. However, that applies more for the future years. Not to say that 2020 didn't have a lot of important releases. The most important, arguably not just in terms of roguelikes, was Hades, yet another landmark title in the roguelike genre. It's yet another action-focused roguelike, but this time set in the ancient Greek version of fanfiction. And its biggest claim to fame was innovating on storytelling and difficulty progression. But before delving into that, let me give you a quick introduction to the game. In Hades, you play as Zagreus, the son of Hades, who got to the age of 517 and started his rebellious phase. So he wants to leave hell just because his dad told him not to do that. To help him escape, Zagreus contacts the gods of Olympus, who find this more entertaining than torturing mortals, so they decide to help him fight through his father's army to escape. With that little introduction out of the way, let's talk storytelling. And as famous author of "Please help, they are holding me captive and forcing me to write a book," I think I know what I'm talking about. Storytelling has never really been roguelike's strong suit. Not to say that previous roguelikes had no story whatsoever, but it really didn't feel like the story was a major focus. Probably because telling a linear story in a roguelike is pretty tough. The randomization aspect and the fact that they are games meant to be played and replayed over and over mean that it's quite hard to tell a full story. The solution to this was previously using only the intro and endings as the points where the story is told. However, this creates a pretty big disconnect between story and gameplay. Hades manages to use its non-linear storytelling to craft a story that feels reactive and not detached from the actual gameplay. When you do something in a run, it's acknowledged, and it unlocks new dialogue with the cast of characters, which are the main vehicle through which the story is told. I feel like I'm forgetting something though. Oh yeah, that. Hades is a pretty hard game at the beginning. However, this is where the other significant innovation comes into play. Hades takes the permanent upgrades concept from Dead Cells and pushes it even further, removing the Vania parts and adding tons of different types of upgrades. The most important of which is the Mirror, where Zagreus can spend his edgelord points on important upgrades like more health, more damage, and access to your trust fund. Another permanent upgrade is the Contractor, which allows you to add basic services that Hades was way too poor to afford, and decides to instead force his kid to pay. These permanent upgrades serve to lower the difficulty by making you stronger, as well as make losing a run less frustrating, since you can use the currency you earned for permanent upgrades to make your next run easier. Hades was a massive success and increased the momentum of the whole genre significantly, as proven by these two huge success stories: Vampire Survivors and Balatro. Now, I'm grouping these two together for a couple of reasons. They were both huge successes that everyone has heard of, they both inspired lots and lots of other games in a similar style, they both were developed by one person in their free time who, quote, didn't think it would sell more than 10 to 15 copies, and they are perfect modern-day roguelike examples. Let's start with Vampire Survivors, the game that created the bullet heaven genre, finally letting some bullets ascend to the pearly gates. Although, I must say, I don't feel like I am the bullet hell. Most of the time, I'm more like the average Warhammer player. But let's explain the basics first. In Vampire Survivors, you play as any of the 165 playable characters, and not even one banana. The number makes a little more sense when you figure out that the difference between characters are a passive ability and the starting weapon. I mean, surely your strategy still changes depending on the character, right? Not really. In Vampire Survivors, all you have to do is collect these gems by moving around, while every weapon you have auto-fires constantly. When you collect enough gems, you level up and get to choose a weapon or passive to get, but you can only get 6 of each max. If you choose something you already have, that levels up and becomes stronger. Finally, holding certain item combos allows you to fuse them to create more powerful items. The goal is to survive until 30 minutes when death shows up and you have to try to kill it, all the while collecting gold to upgrade yourself. Oh, in the process of explaining the basics, I explained nearly the whole game. Yeah, Vampire Survivors is a pretty simple game. Sure, picking items requires some strategy, but other than that, it's so easy you can literally leave and it will play itself, while you're being responsible or playing Balatro. Balatro may not have technically created a new genre, but its success definitely inspired a wave of gambling-based roguelikes, or gamble-likes, patent pending. Balatro's core idea is, what if poker was actually fun and cool? And so you have all sorts of ways to change up the game that you access at the shop, where you spend the coins you gain by winning rounds on all sorts of stuff, like tarot cards to change something about the cards in your deck or give you special effects, planet cards that buff a certain hand, vouchers which give you passive buffs, spectral cards which do all sorts of stuff but usually at a cost, and the two most important ones, jokers and card packs. The card packs allow you to change your deck by adding new cards, allowing you to piss off everyone else at the poker table when you play your 5 of a kind. The jokers, however, are the real star of the show. They are the thing that alters the game the most, and usually you build your strategy around one or a combo of them you found. It uses the strategic decision making of the roguelike deck builder genre to add actual depth to what would be a purely luck-based game. But unlike most roguelike deck builders, Balatro has no definitive ending. Once you beat the final boss in quotes, you just keep on going until the amount you need to win rivals the US defense budget. And that's pretty much the whole history of roguelikes. Now I can finally answer the question, what is a roguelike? I still don't know. And don't even ask about the subgenres. I have no idea what this means. Okay, let's try to figure it out. Roguelite is a term created by the Berlin interpretation guys to define all the games that weren't quite so similar to Rogue but still had some aspects. Unfortunately for this shredded piece of paper, that definition would reduce roguelikes to just about 40 games and would make roguelites the main genre, which just doesn't really feel right. So some people came up with a new definition for roguelites. Roguelites have permanent upgrades that decrease the difficulty. Which is again a confusing definition, because most roguelikes have some sort of permanent progression, like The Binding of Isaac or Risk of Rain 2, which unlock new items. But this definition is more so targeted at games like Dead Cells and Hades, but it's still kind of a flimsy definition, which is why I refuse to use it and just call all of them roguelikes. But there is an even worse subgenre, probably just created by Steam, but when I saw it, I knew I had to pretend to be incredibly angry at it for content. Action roguelike, which is a terrible subgenre because 99% of roguelikes are action-oriented. It's a really bad name if it happens to actually be a subcategory and not something made up by Steam, because it's way too generic, like this thing. Now, I get it, calling a genre something likes or just the name of the games that started it is a bit overdone. But action RPG? Maybe back in the day when Diablo first came out, it was more actiony than most RPGs, but nowadays, basically every RPG is action-oriented. So when you say, I like ARPGs, and someone says, stop speaking in code, you reptilian devil, and you're forced to break down the acronym, it doesn't make someone think of Diablo, Path of Exile, or Grim Dawn. They probably think of Fallout New Vegas, or Cyberpunk, or a bad game, which defeats the whole... I think you get the point. But moving on from this extremely unrelated tangent I was desperate to go on, my official definition of roguelikes is a game with random elements and permadeath, or some kind of way of forcing you to reset a run, which is super unspecific, and arguably you can fit a lot of games that don't feel quite right as roguelikes in this definition, but it's a decent enough definition that includes all the stuff that makes sense and leaves plenty of wiggle room for experimentation. And now we have reached the end, the final question. Why are there so many roguelikes nowadays? And to know for sure, I hacked the brain of several indie roguelike devs to figure out why they make roguelikes. And test results show 2 of them thought, man, I'm hungry. 1 of them thought about how cool space is, and 5 of them thought about this super cool new feature that will get cut for scope later. Well, I guess I have to make my uneducated guesses. My uneducated guess is that it's a genre that is very efficient with content. You make a room and then it gets reused 100 times and the player never gets tired of it. It's fun to mix with other things, it's very popular, and it's a genre full of indie success stories. Or there's a guy in Burn France that spawns these like eggs to devalue life for the eventual takeover of the French spider empire. I know which one I believe in, not where I usually am, eh? Well, I decided to play a little game with you folks who get to the end. Comment the name of the game I'm in to win the satisfaction that you knew that, and I might do it again. Anyways, no score this time, it doesn't really fit, so just subscribe, like, and try the image guessing thing. Or else I will think you're a coward and deserve a coward out of 10 rating. Oh wait, that's a